In a world that rarely slows down, we tell stories that do, stories that don't scream for attention, but whisper something deeper. Here, we explore the emotions behind our hardest decisions. The guilt, the fear, the silence that shapes who we are. These aren't just stories, they're mirrors. And if, by the end, you see yourself in this story, or know someone who's lived something like it, tell us in the comments. And more importantly, what would you do? Would you make the same decision? No one noticed when it started, not even her. Things don't fall apart all at once. First, they bend, then they crack, and finally, they quietly break. That's how it happened with Laura. And that's how her life unraveled. Laura was 38, and her face no longer looked like her own. The mirror, once a place for vanity and smiles, had become just a checkpoint. Enough makeup to hide the fatigue, acceptable dark circles, hair clean enough to avoid questions. She woke before the kids, before her husband, before the sun, made breakfast, packed lunches, checked her phone out of habit, then sat at the kitchen table holding her breath. Sometimes, the fridge made a sound that felt like a sigh. Sometimes it was her. Daniel, her husband, was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. A look was enough to drain the joy from a room. One cold comment could flatten a whole evening. A silent meal was punishment. He didn't hit her, not in the way people usually describe abuse. But he left marks. Marks in the way he spoke, in the comparisons he made, in the calculated silences that lasted for hours. Laura no longer knew who she was. All she knew was that she stayed for the kids, mostly for Lucas. Lucas was 11, quiet, sensitive. He felt what others refused to say out loud. He noticed every tone of voice, every glance, every heavy footstep in the hallway. He never said it outright, but Laura knew. Lucas was afraid of his father. He hid it behind his tablet, behind short answers, behind long silences. One night, Lucas had a panic attack. He was lying, in bed, eyes wide, saying the world was going to end. Laura stayed by his side until he fell asleep, her hand resting over his chest, feeling the rhythm of a heart beating too fast. And in that darkness, she knew Lucas was sinking, and she had to do something. Laura didn't go to work that day. She called the clinic and said she wasn't feeling well. She didn't have to invent much. The tone of her voice already told most of the truth. It wasn't the flu. It wasn't a headache. It was something heavier, something sitting on her chest, gripping her stomach, tightening her throat. After the call, she sat at the kitchen table holding a warm cup of coffee in her cold hands. She didn't take a single sip, just sat there, staring at nothing, listening to the house slowly wake up. Helena, her younger one, was singing in her bedroom. Daniel had already left as usual, without saying goodbye. Lucas was still in bed, lying just as she had left him, under the blanket, staring at the ceiling. Laura wanted to say something, do something, break the spell of silence. But everything felt too fragile, like even the slightest word might make everything collapse. Later that day, she made a decision. She dressed Lucas slowly, without pressure. Told him they were going out, just the two of them. He nodded, not particularly curious or excited. They headed to the school, but not for class. Laura had thought of talking to someone, maybe the school counselor, maybe the principal, someone who would listen. But halfway there, she turned the car, looked at Lucas in the rearview mirror and saw something in his eyes. Not fear, not sadness, something deeper, a kind of quiet resignation. Instead of the school, she drove to a small park, empty, silent, just a few dry leaves and motionless swings. They sat on a wooden bench. The sun filtered through the trees, casting soft, broken patches of light on the ground. Lucas said nothing. Neither did she, until, in a whisper, Laura asked, "Are you afraid of your dad?" He didn't answer right away, but his eyes, they trembled. After a long pause, he said that sometimes his father yelled when she wasn't around, that he once threw the video game at the wall. That one time he pinned him against a shelf and grabbed his arm too hard. Laura looked at her son's arm. There was a fading yellow bruise. He said he'd fallen. She knew it was a lie, and on that park bench, with the breeze gently moving the branches overhead, she felt a storm building inside her. Fear, guilt, anger. Anger at Daniel, anger at herself, anger for letting it get this far. She held Lucas's hand. They sat in silence for a few more minutes. Then, they went home. On the way back, she didn't speak. Neither did he, but he glanced at her a few times, as if waiting, hoping for a sign, a promise, a reaction, something to tell him. It's going to be okay. She didn't say anything. That night, Daniel came home and sat on the couch like always, remote in hand, eyes on the screen. Laura cooked dinner in silence. Lucas stayed in his room. That night she didn't sleep. She lay awake for hours, imagining every possible scenario. She could confront Daniel, but he'd deny it, like always. She could call the police, but that would end everything. The house, the stability, the life the kids knew. She could leave, but where would they go? With what money? With what strength? And so she did. What so many women have done. Nothing. She chose to wait a little longer. Maybe things would improve. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe, just maybe, Lucas would forget. But deep down, she knew none of that was true. And the next morning, she acted like everything was normal. Coffee, backpacks, silence, like nothing had happened. But something had, and Lucas knew, and in his heart, something broke. The days that followed felt hollow. There were no fights, no shouting, no broken dishes, but there were no hugs either, no questions, no conversations. It was like the house had been covered in a thin sheet of tension. Everything looked the same, but nothing was truly in place. Lucas came home from school quietly. He ate in silence, went to bed early. Helena, still untouched by what was going on, tried to fill the space with drawings and endless questions. Most went unanswered. Daniel, for his part, continued acting like the master of time. He arrived when he pleased, spoke when it suited him, got irritated when he felt like it. And when he noticed Laura's glances or Lucas's distance, he'd throw in some barbed remark. "This kid's getting soft, just like his mother. Keep babying him like this, and he's gonna break the first time life hits him." Laura listened and swallowed it. At first, she used to argue. Now she just observed. She didn't know who she was in this marriage anymore. A partner? Prisoner? A spectator? Sometimes she thought about telling someone. Her mother, her sister, someone at school. But she always backed out. She didn't want to hear what she already knew. Didn't want to be pushed into taking that final step. One Sunday afternoon, while Daniel was washing the car and Laura was taking clothes off the line, she heard a loud thud from inside. She ran, found Lucas sitting on the kitchen floor, forehead bruised, a broken bowl beside him. He said he slipped. Laura wanted to believe him, but there was something in his eyes that screamed. That night, she sat alone in the bathroom with the door locked. She turned on the faucet to muffle the sound of her breathing. She thought of every possible outcome. Call the police, leave, tell someone. She even thought about disappearing, just taking the kids, and vanishing. But then she thought about where she would go, how she'd afford it, how Daniel would react, and she froze. Worse than that, a cruel thought whispered inside her. You let this happen. You stayed when you should have left. You knew. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to silence the voices. But they were louder than any excuse she could make. The next day, while dropping Lucas off at school, one of his teachers pulled her aside. She said Lucas wasn't himself. Quieter. More. Distracted. And then she gently asked if everything was okay at home. Laura forced a smile. Said it was just a phase. The teacher nodded, but her eyes said something else. Maybe she knew. Maybe she'd seen this before. Laura left the school with shaking legs. Sat in the car for several minutes before turning the key. On the drive home, for the first time, she thought seriously about leaving. Taking the kids, getting on a bus, starting over. But then she stepped inside the house, saw the couch where the kids used to cuddle and watch cartoons, the dining table still holding a jar of cookies, the bed she still shared, and she thought, maybe just a little longer. It was always like this. Every time Laura got close to making a decision, something pulled her back. Sometimes it was the hopeful look in Helena's eyes, asking to sleep in her mother's bed. Sometimes it was Lucas's exhausted silence, like he'd stopped expecting anything. But more often than she liked to admit, it was Daniel himself, not because he'd changed, but because he knew exactly how to keep the machine running. He knew when to smile, when to make a random compliment in front of the kids, when to offer help just enough to appear present. He was like a quiet wave. He didn't crash, but he wore everything down from the inside. That week, Daniel showed up at Lucas's school unannounced. Said he was going to pick him up, wanted to spend time with his son. When Lucas got into the car, he saw his father wearing sunglasses. The radio turned up too loud. They drove to a hardware store. On the way, Daniel asked questions that sounded casual, about school, friends, whether Mom had said anything strange. Lately, Lucas gave short answers. Yes. No. I guess. On the drive back, Daniel stopped the car a few blocks from home, turned off the music, looked at Lucas and said, "You know, son, some things that happen at home need to stay at home. Not everyone needs to know our business. You understand?" Lucas nodded without a word. Daniel smiled and kept driving as if nothing had happened. That night, Lucas skipped dinner. Laura tried to insist, but he said his stomach hurt, went to his room and locked the door. When she asked what was wrong, he just replied, "It's fine, Mom, really." But it wasn't. And she knew. Daniel, on the other hand, was acting different. More attentive, more polite. The kind of calm that frightened her. He started getting involved in the routine again. Asking about Helena's schoolwork. Helping set the table, even. Brought home flowers one day and said, with a half smile, "Thought you might like these." Laura wanted to believe it meant something, but everything felt too rehearsed. Like each act was part of a performance, like he was building his public version of innocence. One night Laura woke to a soft sound. She walked down the hall and saw Lucas's bedroom light on, the door slightly ajar. He was sitting on the bed, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the wall. When he saw his mother, he tried to act normal, but his eyes were red. His face was pale. She sat beside him and asked what was going on. Lucas hesitated, then whispered, "Do you believe me?" Laura took a moment to answer. It felt like hours. Then she said, "Of course I do," but deep down, that wasn't really the question he was asking. What Lucas wanted to know was, "Are you going to do anything with what I told you?" And that, she still didn't know how to answer. In the days that followed, Laura began to notice a different kind of silence in Lucas. It wasn't fear anymore. It was distance. He no longer waited for her to act. No longer asked for help with homework. No longer came looking for her at bedtime. He was present, but far, like something had already broken. Not between him and Daniel, but between him and her. And that hurt more than any scream ever could. She tried to reach out, asked about school, offered to watch a movie with him, suggested going out for ice cream. Lucas always answered politely, said he was tired, preferred to stay in his room. Helena, still wrapped in innocence, kept singing and skipping and drawing hearts in her notebooks. And that made it even harder. Laura was terrified that protecting one child would mean destroying the childhood of the other. She was stuck. Every option came with a price. Every possible step seemed like it would break something else. One evening, Lucas left his tablet on the kitchen table. Laura picked it up to take it to his room. The screen was unlocked, a notes app was open. It wasn't schoolwork, it was something else. Curiosity 1. She read it, and the words hit like a punch to the chest. I think my mom loves me, but sometimes it feels like she's pretending nothing's wrong. Maybe she thinks she's protecting me, but it hurts more to know she knows, and still does nothing. I just wish she was brave. That's all, because I can't. B. Laura froze. The tablet felt heavy in her hands. She closed the app, put the device back on the table, and walked to her room in silence. That night, she couldn't sleep. Tossed and turned, the words replaying in her head. She loved him with everything she had, but is it still love if you don't protect? At 3:42 a.m., she got up and walked into Lucas's room. He was asleep, peacefully for once. She sat at the edge of the bed and looked at him, ran her fingers through his hair, felt the warmth of his forehead, listened to the rhythm of his breathing. She remembered the day he was born, the fear of holding him for the first time, the silent promise she made to herself, to protect him, to be there, to never let anyone hurt him. And now, there she was, afraid of breaking the house, while her son was breaking inside. Back in her room, Daniel was still asleep. He mumbled something in his sleep and turned over. Laura looked up at the ceiling, then at the walls, then at the narrow beam of light coming through the curtain. She thought about every excuse she'd made, every reason for staying, and understood something. She hadn't been protecting the kids. She'd been protecting the structure, the name, the illusion of a family. And that was costing her the very child she most wanted to save. That week, the school called. It was the academic coordinator. She said she needed to meet with Lucas's parents. Nothing urgent, according to her, just a conversation about behavior and engagement. But the tone was different. It was the kind of tone used by someone who knows more than they can say over the phone. Laura hung up with her throat tight. She knew that call was a turning point, a line she couldn't cross without consequence. Daniel was in the living room scrolling through his phone. She entered calmly and said, "The school called. They want to talk to us." He didn't even look up. "About what?" "About Lucas. About how he's been doing." Daniel scoffed, annoyed. "Here we go with the drama." Laura stayed silent. She was used to this reaction, but this time, she didn't back down. "We need to go. Both of us." Daniel waved her off, like it wasn't worth the energy. That afternoon, they went to the school in silence. The coordinator welcomed them with a gentle voice and a direct gaze. She didn't talk about grades, didn't mention academics. She talked about Lucas, said he'd become withdrawn, that he avoided eye contact, seemed anxious, sad. She said other students had mentioned he looked afraid on certain days, that a teacher overheard him saying, "Things are complicated at home." Laura's hands began to sweat. Daniel crossed his arms, face unreadable. The coordinator said the school wasn't making accusations, they were just observing and asking for care. On the way back, in the car, Daniel said, "Did you tell them anything?" "Of course not." "Then they're making things up. That boy's got too much imagination." Laura didn't answer. She stared out the window, watching the city go by like she no longer belonged to it. The house wasn't a home anymore. Her son wasn't a child anymore. And she wasn't the same woman who'd entered that marriage years ago. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Daniel leaned against the bedroom door and said, low and cold, You're making me look like a monster. Keep feeding this narrative, and I'll leave. Let's see how you handle everything alone. Let's see how long your little receptionist salary holds up." Laura didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't beg. She just looked at him, long and steady, and inside, something shifted. She still didn't know exactly what she was going to do, but she knew one thing. If she did nothing, she would lose Lucas, not to death, but to silence, to emotional abandonment, to a wound that would follow him for the rest of his life. Not for what had been done to him, but for what had been ignored. 2 days later, Lucas didn't want to go to school, Laura asked gently. Asked if he was sick, if he had a fever, a headache. He said no. He just said he was tired, but his eyes told a different story. It was exhaustion, yes, but of another kind, the kind that comes from living in fear every day, from walking on eggshells, from pretending everything's fine when your soul has already stopped screaming. Laura didn't push. She let him stay home, and that day, she didn't go to work either. She made breakfast, cleaned up a little, and stayed nearby, watching. Lucas spent most of the day in his room reading old comics, headphones on. Laura brought him a plate of fruit, sat on the edge of the bed, and tried to talk. "Do you want to tell me what you're feeling?" He shrugged. "Nothing." She tried again. "Is there something you wish were different?" Lucas was quiet for a while. Then, without looking at her, he said, "I just wish the house felt light again, like it used to." Laura felt a tight pain in her chest, but she didn't say anything. She knew words wouldn't be enough anymore. That afternoon, she went out alone, stopped in front of a police station, but didn't go in. She just stood across the street, watching, thinking, feeling the weight of what it might mean to walk through those doors. She imagined what it would be like to file a report, to say everything, to be asked questions, to face the consequences. Later, she walked toward a nearby mental health center. But again, she didn't go in. Shame, doubt, fear. She had no evidence. What if they didn't believe her? What if they thought she was overreacting? What if she lost custody? What if he turned the story around? On the way home, she found Helena playing in the yard, chalk drawings on the ground, soft music playing from the radio. For a moment, everything looked normal. But Lucas wasn't there, and that said it all. That evening, Daniel came home later than usual. He barely spoke, ate in silence. Cast a long, quiet look at Lucas. Laura saw it. Pretended not to. After dinner, with the kids already in their rooms, he approached her in the kitchen. His voice was low, controlled, cold. "Heard you were near the police station. What are you trying to do?" She froze. "You're following me now?" "Don't have to. People talk. Small town, remember?" Laura tried to stay calm, but her breathing shortened. Her hands trembled. "You cornered me, Daniel. Lucas is suffering. He's fading, and I'm not going to keep watching it happen." Daniel gave a dry laugh. "You're a joke, Laura. Always were. Go ahead. Call the cops. Ruin everything. Let's see who's left standing when it's over." He turned and walked to the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. Laura stood alone in the hallway, listening to the shower run. And that night, she knew the decision couldn't be postponed anymore. Whatever she chose from here on out would cost something. The only question was who would pay, her, Daniel, or Lucas. The next morning, Laura woke up before the sun. She got up slowly, careful not to make a sound, like she was trespassing in her own home. She passed through the quiet living room, grabbed her phone, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold, and the sky was a pale early morning blue. She sat there alone, holding a cup of weak coffee, and, for the first time in weeks, she thought clearly. It was no longer a question of if she would act. It was how. She couldn't just run. She couldn't cause a scene. She couldn't throw her kids into chaos or risk looking unstable. She needed a plan. She needed support, and she needed proof. That's when she decided to call Patricia, an old college friend who worked as a social worker. They hadn't spoken in years, but Laura remembered how Patricia had always seen through her polite smiles. The call was short. Laura didn't say everything, but she said enough. And on the other end, Patricia didn't gasp. She didn't judge. She didn't pressure. She simply said, "You're not crazy. You're scared. That's what they do. But you're not alone. If you want, I'll help you build a way out." Laura hung up with tears in her eyes. It wasn't an escape plan. It was a plan for freedom. That same afternoon, she picked up Lucas from school and asked to speak with the coordinator, alone this time. She shared more than before, said she needed help protecting her son, but that she couldn't make any sudden moves yet. The coordinator listened carefully, and when Laura finished, she simply said, "We'll take care of him here. You take care of him at home. And when you're ready, you won't be alone." Laura left with a different kind of weight on her shoulders. It wasn't fear. It wasn't denial. It was responsibility and forward motion. That night she made dinner slowly, talked with Helena, combed her hair, read a bedtime story. Then she went to Lucas's room and asked if he wanted to sleep beside her. He hesitated for a second, then nodded. They slept together, for the first time in months. In the middle of the night, he moved closer and held her hand. And in the darkness, Laura didn't think about consequences. She thought about protection. She knew Daniel would sense something was changing, that it wouldn't come without cost. But for the first time, Laura wasn't hiding from guilt. She was preparing to act. With fear, yes, but with resolve, because protecting a child sometimes means losing everything that looked normal. And even so, choosing to move forward. Daniel noticed. It wasn't spoken out loud, but he felt it. He saw it in Laura's steadier gaze, in the silences that no longer sounded like submission, but resistance, in how she held the children a little longer, how she changed the subject when he entered the room, how she avoided eye contact, not out of fear, but out of strategy. She wasn't dancing to the same rhythm anymore, and Daniel hated losing control. In the days that followed, he started acting differently. Not with overt aggression. He didn't need that. Daniel knew how to poison things in silence. He came home early, started being involved, complimented the dinner, asked about the kids' homework, bought flowers one night and said, smiling slightly, "Thought you'd like these." Laura didn't believe a word of it. Everything felt rehearsed, like every gesture was a line in a performance, like he was building his defense, his version of innocence. She began preparing, documents hidden in a folder, birth certificates, IDs, school records, emergency numbers, just in case. She spoke quietly with a cousin in another city. Didn't give full details, just asked, "If one day I need to go somewhere with the kids, could we stay with you?" The cousin didn't hesitate. "Of course, just say the word." Patricia kept guiding her, step by step. Legal options, protective measures, support networks. None of it was easy, none of it fast, but it was possible. And that was something. Lucas began to show small signs of hope. He started eating better, laughed, had a video on his tablet, made a joke during dinner. Tiny things. But to Laura, they felt like spring after years of cold. Daniel noticed too, and it bothered him deeply. One Friday night after the kids had gone to bed, he approached her in the kitchen. He looked her in the eyes for several seconds and said, calmly and coldly, "You think you're doing everything right, huh? But don't forget, I know who you really are. If I go down, I'll take you with me." Laura held her coffee cup with both hands, her voice steady. "You never really knew me, Daniel, and now, maybe it's too late." He stared at her a bit longer, then walked away. That night, Laura didn't cry. She closed the bedroom door, laid down beside Helena, and in the dark she thought, "This isn't about courage anymore. This is about survival." It was a gray Saturday. Laura woke up before anyone else. She made coffee, folded some clothes, cleaned the kitchen in silence, like someone preparing to leave a place forever. The kids were still asleep. Daniel was snoring, flat on his back, completely unaware. She walked around the house for hours, slowly, collected documents, packed the birth certificates, school records, their ID cards, prepared 2 backpacks with just enough clothes for a few days. Each action felt like a fracture, each zipper closing, like breaking away from something old. Around 10 a.m., Helena woke up. Laura masked the tension with a soft smile, gave her chocolate milk, turned on the TV. Lucas came down soon after. He looked at his mother for a long time, but said nothing. She was different, but he had stopped expecting explanations. That afternoon, Daniel left the house saying he had some errands. He didn't say where or with whom. Laura only nodded. He didn't notice a thing. When night fell, Laura served dinner, but barely touched her food. She stirred her spoon in circles, her thoughts spinning faster than her breath, tension building under her skin. But under the fear, a flicker of resolve. She put the kids to bed early, waited for the house to fall silent. Past 11 p.m., she returned to the children's room with the backpacks. Lucas was still awake. She whispered, "Come with me," quietly. He didn't ask why. He just got up. Helena was asleep in her arms. Laura slipped on her sneakers, took the keys, and stopped in front of the door. Everything was ready. Outside, her cousin's car was waiting at the corner. Engine running, lights off. 3 steps, and she'd be gone. 3. She looked at Lucas. He was trembling slightly, the backpack tight on his shoulders. She looked at the door. Her hand gripped the handle. She looked at Helena, sleeping, peaceful, unaware. And then, she froze, the weight of her daughter in her arms, the chill in her gut, Daniel's voice echoing in her head. "Let's see how far your receptionist's salary gets you. The bills, the rent, the school, the silence of what comes next." Laura closed her eyes, took a breath, and when she opened them again, her hand was still on the handle, but she didn't turn it. She took a step back, then another. She let go of Lucas's backpack and whispered, "Go back to bed, baby. It's late." Lucas didn't respond. He just looked at her, and in his eyes, there was no surprise, only something worse. Acceptance. The next morning, everything looked the same. Sunlight leaked through the window, coffee brewed in the machine. Daniel got up, checked his phone, and went straight to the bathroom, just like every other day. Laura was in the kitchen, wearing her apron, staring at the toaster like it was a countdown. Helena came in soon after, holding her cloth doll. She asked for juice, made a silly face, laughed. Lucas came down in silence. His eyes were hollow. He looked at his mom, then at his backpack on the table, already packed, like always. Nothing was said about the night before, no questions, no explanations. Laura placed his lunchbox in his bag, her hands cold. "You've got a test today, right?" she asked softly. Lucas nodded. "Good luck, sweetheart." He picked up his bag and left. He didn't look back. That same day, Daniel complimented her in front of a neighbor. Said she was an amazing mother, a real fighter. Laura smiled, a rehearsed smile, the kind you put on like makeup. That night, they had dinner together. Daniel made a toast, saying life was hard sometimes, but what mattered was sticking together. Helena clapped, Lucas lowered his head, Laura raised her glass and swallowed it. The days that followed were quiet. Daniel returned to his routines, washed the car, told jokes in public. Laura went back to work, back to schedules, back to autopilot, and Lucas. Lucas never mentioned that night again. He never asked why she stayed, never complained, never cried. He just started answering faster, talking less, smiling when expected, just like his father did. A week later, Laura opened the wardrobe. The backpacks were still there, perfectly packed, still waiting. But not today, not tomorrow, maybe never. She had protected the house, the name, the image, and the cost. Not paid that day, but one day, it will be, when Lucas grows up and looks back and remembers that his mother knew and still stayed.